Hello, everyone. It's Anne here from English Valley Cafe. Welcome back, or welcome if you are new to this channel. Today, I wanted to talk about a question or a comment that I get a lot from English learners. And that is, I understand when people speak English. I understand when native speakers speak. I understand when I watch movies, but I cannot speak. It's difficult for me to speak. I cannot find the word that I want to use, or I forget words. And today I wanted to talk about this. There could be many possible reasons for this, but today in this video, I want to focus on the vocabulary aspect in answering this question. In language, language learning, there are 4 skills: listening and speaking, and then reading and writing. So those are the 4 skills. Now, listening and reading, those are what we call the input. Okay, so that's how we acquire new words. That's how we learn new words. That's where the information comes in. And then we have the output, which is speaking and writing. So listening and speaking go together. Reading and writing go together. But really, all these 4 skills, they're all interconnected. So in order to improve your speaking, which is the output, you need input. And input is where you're acquiring all the information. That's like your tool. And in order to do that, you have to be listening and also reading. Okay, so that's the input. You're learning new words. You're learning different sentence structures. You're learning the nuance of different words. All these 4 skills are really important, and I don't think I emphasize that enough on this channel. I focus on speaking here on this channel, but really you do need all 4 skills. Today in this video, I want to focus on vocabulary, the vocabulary aspect. So when we're learning vocabulary, there are what I like to call the passive vocabulary and then the active vocabulary. And so the passive vocabulary is like what you know. These words, you know their definition. When you hear people use them, you know what they mean. So that's why a lot of people say, well, I understand when people speak, but I can't speak, because you have those passive vocabulary. You know the definition of those vocabulary. You probably know the parts of speech. You probably know how it's pronounced. So when people are, using the words when they're speaking, you're like, oh yeah, I know that word. I know what that means. And I know what that person is talking about. But then the question comes, well, when you have to use the word yourself, can you use it? Okay, and that's the active vocabulary that we're talking about here. So the active vocabulary are the ones that you know how to use. When you are speaking, those are your vocabulary. You're able to use it just like that without thinking too much about, oh, what word should I use? Can I use this word in this context? Because you know these words, they're like in you, they're in your soul. Those are your vocabulary. So that's the difference between passive vocabulary and active vocabulary. So I think for a lot of English learners, they have more passive vocabulary than they have active vocabulary. So how do we change the passive vocabulary into our active vocabulary? And I always kind of make this comparison, like, how when you're learning math, or when you're learning to do something, like you're learning a skill, for example, you're learning to ride a bike, or you're learning to paint. A lot of times we understand the concept, we understand how to do it, but understanding how to do it and actually doing it yourself and being able to do it, those are 2 different things. So same thing with vocabulary here. Knowing a vocabulary, like knowing the definition of it, knowing how to pronounce it, and you being able to use that vocabulary is 2 different things. So what do you have to do to be able to turn these passive vocabulary into active vocabulary, into a vocabulary that's part of your life. So you really have to use the vocabulary. So whenever you learn new words, try to use it right away. And I think one of the easiest way to do that is by writing a sentence with it. That's the very first thing, because sometimes you don't have a person that you can speak with to use that vocabulary right away, but you can always have time and have the opportunity to use it in a sentence. So when you learn a new word, try to connect it to your personal experience. So for example, let's say you learn the word frustrated. So after you know what it means, how to pronounce it, what parts of speech it is, try to connect it to your personal experience. So think of a time when you were very frustrated and what did that feel like? And then try to form a sentence using the word frustrated. So that way you are making that connection with this word to your personal experience, and then you're using the word in a sentence. And by doing this, this word will turn slowly from being a vocabulary that you know into a vocabulary that is part of you and that you're able to use. So that's the first thing. So I know a lot of you probably learn new words when you are scrolling on social media, and especially if you're reading posts or, like watching a video about vocabulary, and a lot of the teachers will say, okay, now, it's your turn, make a sentence with the word. Try to do that, maybe write your sentence in the comment, you might get some feedback. And one thing that I've noticed with some of my students is that once they learn a new word and I said, okay, now make a sentence with it, because I want to make sure that they know how to use it, even though they know the definition, they know how to pronounce it. But when they actually write a sentence with it, I would give them feedback and said, but, in this context of what you want to say, we don't really use this word. This word is only used in a certain context. Okay, so by practicing using the word, you will learn the nuance of the word or the subtle differences of using the word. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is I would say maybe when you're at a low intermediate to intermediate level, once you're getting a lot of input, you're listening a lot, you're reading a lot, what you can do to help you to turn these vocabulary words that you've learned, that you know, into your active vocabulary, it's once you read something or when you listen to an audio, listen to a podcast, after you do that, try to see if you can do some retelling or you can explain to someone what you just read or what you've just heard. If you don't have somebody that you can actually speak to, you can always speak to yourself. So what you can do is after you read a article, or after you watched a clip or a movie, or you listen to a podcast, pretend that you need to tell somebody what you just heard. So that's kind of like retelling what you just heard. Also, what you can do is talk about your thoughts, right? Because I think a lot of times when we are actually speaking with somebody, we have to tell them what we think about something. So when you listen to something or when you watch something, after you do that, try to talk to yourself, or maybe even if you can find a friend or somebody to share this information with, tell them what you think about what you just heard. And by doing that, you are using these vocabulary that you've acquired through reading and listening, and you're reproducing it. You're trying to use those words. And that way you will be able to remember those words. They are part of your vocabulary. And they're not just, a word that you just heard today or that you just read today and you just know the definition of what those words are, but you're actually able to use it. The last thing I want to mention here is repetition. So in order for a a word, a passive vocabulary, to become an active vocabulary, a vocabulary that is part of you, it takes a lot of repetition and exposure. So if you learn a word and you know, trying to use it in a sentence, you probably use it a couple times when you're talking to people, but you know, maybe a month or 2 months later, you might forget this word and you're trying to talk to somebody about something and you're like, oh, I just learned that word last month and I was able to use it, but now I forgot the word. That's completely normal. And I think that's a good thing when you're forgetting words, because then at least you know that, okay, I've learned this word before, I've seen this word before, and I was able to use it, but I forgot how to use it a month or 2 months later. And now it forces you to go back and review how to use that word and what that word means. So don't expect that you learn a word and that you use it a couple times and that that'll become your active vocabulary. You really need this process of learning and then forgetting it and then learning it again. But the second time that you learn it, it's probably quicker. Like you're like, oh yeah, I remember this word. I know how to use it because previously you've already spent some time learning about it and trying to use it. So this is a process of, you know, yeah, like a back and forth process. It's not something that, okay, once you learn it and then it's nailed in your head forever. Usually it doesn't work like that. So yeah, that's one thing that I want to encourage you. If you know you are forgetting words, it's completely normal, and don't beat yourself up because you're like, oh, how come I'm forgetting all these words that I've learned already? All right, I hope this video was helpful and that you got something out of it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments. If you are enjoying the videos here, make sure you subscribe and tap on the bell notification. And if you know a friend who might find this video useful, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next video.